The president calls it a crackdown. The military calls it a deployment.
But if you look at the reality on the ground, this is neither.
It is an admission of total systemic failure. South African President Cyril Ramaphosa has officially announced that the South African National Defence Force, SANDF, will be deployed onto the streets to combat organized crime.
In his State of the Nation address, he framed this as a decisive blow against the construction mafias and extortion gangs that are strangling the continent's most industrialized economy. The narrative being sold to the public is one of strength, a government finally taking the gloves off to protect its citizens. But from an intelligence perspective, deploying the army to do the job of the police is not a show of strength. It is a flashing red signal of state collapse. It is a public confession that the South African Police Service, SAPS, has lost control of the territory. When a government has to send soldiers, trained for warfare, into its own cities to stop extortionists, it means the civilian institutions have effectively dissolved.
We are no longer talking about crime, we're talking about a low-level insurgency. The mainstream media is reporting the speech. The observer is looking at the streets.
To understand why this is happening now, you have to look at the rise of the shadow state.
Over the last 5 years, criminal syndicates in South Africa have evolved.
They are no longer just robbing cash in transit vans. They have institutionalized themselves into the economy.
The construction mafia specifically has become a parallel government.
They demand 30% of every construction contract in the country, or they burn the site to the ground and murder the foreman. This isn't petty theft, it is a tax. And because the police are either too terrified to act or are on the payroll of these syndicates, the state has lost its monopoly on violence. Ramaphosa's move is a desperate attempt to reclaim that monopoly before the 2026 economic data comes out and reveals that investors have fled.
Let's look at the deep dive data. The focus of this deployment is specifically on Operation Vala Umgodi, the fight against illegal mining, and the construction extortion rackets.
The data shows that these Zama-Zamas, illegal miners, are not just desperate individuals with pickaxes. They are heavily armed militias, often better equipped than the local police, operating underground networks that siphon billions of rands from the formal economy.
Ramaphosa is promising to use modern technology and data-driven policing, but he is handing the keys to a military that is itself in crisis.
The SANDF is critically underfunded, with equipment falling apart and troops already overstretched from peacekeeping missions in the DRC and border control operations. You are taking a blunt instrument, an army, and trying to use it for precision surgery, dismantling complex criminal racketeering networks. History tells us this rarely works. Soldiers are trained to engage enemies, not to gather evidence for prosecution. There is also a massive political risk here. The militarization of policing is a slippery slope. We have seen this movie before in Mexico and Brazil. Once you deploy the army to fight gangs, the gangs militarize in response. The violence escalates. The construction mafia will not just surrender because they see a uniform, they will likely go underground or increase the bribes to military commanders. Furthermore, this creates a dangerous precedent for civil liberties. If the army is the only institution capable of enforcing the law, what happens when political protests arise?
Does the government deploy the same soldiers who are fighting the mafia to suppress dissent? The line between criminal and enemy of the state begins to blur.
The opposition parties are already warning that this is a frantic move to save the ANC's reputation as the party of law and order after years of declining support. So what happens in the next 30 days? Watch the KZN and Gauteng provinces. These are the epicenters of the construction mafia. If we see high-profile arrests and a drop in site disruptions, Ramaphosa might get his win. But if we see reports of military brutality or worse, soldiers being corrupted by the very syndicates they are sent to fight, then the strategy has backfired. The verdict is grim. A government that needs its army to stop its citizens from extorting each other is a government that is running out of options. The gangs can wait. The army cannot stay on the streets forever. You've seen the official narrative. Now you have the facts. Confirm your clearance by hitting that subscribe button. See you in our next update.